Yo, Stats, man. I'm gonna get right into it, man. The 90s. Let's put on. Let's get. I'm gonna close my eyes for this because I have to just visualize things. That's just how it works for me, right?
Okay.
I'm closing my eyes. I'm jumping in the DeLorean, and I don't have a particular year, but I'm programming on the dashboard. Let's go back to the 90s.
Okay.
Right? Early 90s.
Okay.
And I like the flex capacitor is working. We got to hit 88 miles per hour, like Doc Brown said. We got to hit 88 miles per hour, right? And we hit 88 miles per hour, and we're transported back to this time in the early 90s. And I'm thinking, and I'm in particular, I'm thinking about hip hop culture in terms of the music and the richness of it and the diversity of it. Mm-hmm. And like I said, we're in the 90s, man. And one of the things that are resonating with me right now, if I'm allowing this transporting period to take over, is a sound that is coming out of the South, but it doesn't, to me, categorically, or what we consider to be categorically the South or the sound. It wasn't that, man. It was just a sound that resonated with people all over the world because it spoke about the struggle, but it also spoke about the richness of our history as people of color. Right? And then as I'm listening to this music, I'm feeling empowered. But more than feeling empowered, I'm feeling I'm feeling a connection with a kindred spirit, with the person that's responsible for giving us light through the lyrics, through the music, through the messaging. And I'm like, man, this is amazing. And I remember, man, before I go into disclosing who I'm referring to specifically, who also incidentally is our guest that's getting ready to come on, but I remember this was one of the first CDs I bought. CDs. I remember I bought this CD. And I was like, man, I remember popping it in and just listening to it over and over and over again. And it wasn't because it was one of the first CDs I bought. It was just good, man.
Yeah.
The sound was dope. And it was a perfect, it sort of offered some great diversity during that time, as hip hop did during that time, to all of the other things. So we had Kane, we had Rakim, we had NWA, we had Pete Rock and CL Smooth. We had a myriad of artists with just a diversity in expression through song content. But instead of me going any further, what I'd like to say is the album that I'm referring to is Arrested Development, man, or the group that I'm referring to is Arrested Development, and just the ability for this group, particularly Speech, the dude behind the lyrics, the content, and the music, just being able to resonate with us in such a special way, man. How did you feel about that, Stats, that album? I mean, the group period I'm talking about.
That was to me, that was like the feel good time in the culture,
right?
You know, to be able to feel good about who you are, you know what I mean, where you came from, your history. They made all that, you know, a visual, you know, and a different experience. And at the time, you know, like everybody was listening to one thing.
Right.
You know what I'm saying? So when they came out, you know, it was Mr. Wendell, you know, all those songs, man, it changed everything. You know what I mean? And for me personally, it just made me feel good about being black.
Absolutely.
You know what I mean? And knowing that somebody was out there, you know, resonating about who I was or telling a story about where I came from.
Exactly.
That's what made it. But I'm not even going to drag it on, man.
Yeah.
Not even going to drag it on. We got a real special guest. Tell them who it is, D.
Yo, and the album, and just in case you guys don't know the album that we're talking about, we're talking specifically about the debut release of Arrested Development, 3 years, 5 months, and 2 days in the life of, I guess, Arrested Development. But we are speaking with none other than the hip-hop legend, Speech. Speech, It's good to have you, good brother. Man? Thank you for
beautiful introduction. Beautiful introduction.
No, man, it's all good, and it's absolutely stats. I'm sorry for cutting you off. I'm just geeking right now, man. Yo, I'm geeking, but speech is absolutely with absolute sincerity that we deliver that intro, man. You are a hip hop legend, and I tell you, the music that you guys gave us, man, and the music that you that you guys continue to give us, and we'll get into that, is something that truly shaped us as not just young men growing up in Brooklyn, New York, during as the sort of crack era was coming to an end, but you truly are responsible for being a cog in a machine that will help us obtain knowledge of self, obtain righteousness, and truly become the responsible, prideful black men, fathers, and husbands that we are today. So I thank you, good brother, for that.
Word up, man. That means a lot to me. Thank you.
Absolutely, absolutely. But man, again, like I said, it's a pleasure and an honor, man. But as we always do on the Chronicles of a Hip Hop Legend radio show, that title is absolutely fitting for you. And I know we're limited on time, but what I want to do is just jump right into it, man, and sort of get some information about your journey, from the beginning in terms of your life up until now, and we're gonna try to condense this into a short period because I know there's some other engagements that you got to get to. But let's just jump into it, man. Like, obviously we had to do some prepping to get prepared for our conversation with you, and I know based on Tennessee, that that song, I always thought you were from Tennessee, and then later on I found out that you actually lived in Atlanta, but you spent some time in Tennessee, but then you weren't born even in the South. You were born in Wisconsin?
Yeah, born in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Yeah, right.
So tell us about how was, because the truth is, man, is that when somebody is musically inclined, the assumption is that person always comes from a musical family, like it's just a part of their DNA. So what was that like for you growing up early? What was that in your household, music?
Well, the truth is, it really wasn't. Like my mom, she was musical, but not really in the house. So she knew how to play keys and like organ and stuff, but she did it when she was a child. So by the time I was born, there wasn't a lot of music per se in the house, but my dad and mom were entrepreneurs. And so my dad opened up, among many other things, he opened up a nightclub. Okay. And in that nightclub, both of my mom and dad worked late nights. So when I would get out of school, I would go to the nightclub and just hang out there and even sleep there. So I would be there pretty much every night of the week. And so, I'd be, age 10, 11, 12, 13, just watching people dance to all the music that was out. So that's when I really fell deep in love with music and just watching the DJs spin, and seeing the impact that it had on the people. That's what made me really want to be a musician.
Sure. So then at that point, were you starting to get into that process of penning lyrics, even if it was just for recreational purposes? Were you starting to do that? Were some of the earliest things that you did at that point?
Not really. To be honest, I was more into the DJ thing. So I was like watching the DJ. I learned from some DJs that were almost twice my age. They would teach me how to crossfade. Back then, scratching and mixing wasn't as big, so they would just teach me the general art of keeping the crowd moving. Right. And so they would teach me how to crossfade, how to mix records in together, but not necessarily mix them on beat. And this was in the 70s, and so, late 70s. And so when I first heard Rapper's Delight and Grandmaster Flash Adventures on the Wheels of Steel, when I heard that, it absolutely blew my mind. Because first of all, you're talking about people manipulating records, and that blew my mind. But then it also blew my mind to hear people manipulating records on a record, which was Grandmaster Flash Adventures on the Wheels of Steel. Right. So I was just blown away by the DJing. And so my basis in hip hop music came from being behind the MCs, being behind the breakdancers, the beatboxers, and spinning. And so I would spin, sometimes using 2 turntables, and I had a crew called Knights of the Turntables that we would spin throughout Milwaukee, and do house parties and venues and stuff like that. And it became very popular, very, very renowned in my hometown. Sure. And so we was like on the forefront of bringing hip hop music to Milwaukee and to the Wisconsin scene. Nice. It was me and about 2 other cats that was very instrumental in all of that. So
nice. Yeah. So we got to ask you for this disclosure, man. What was your DJ name?
DJ Peach.
Okay.
Peach, Peech. And what happened was, I still do. I have a big old head. And I'm light skinned, and so all the girls used to call me Peach.
Okay.
Because of my skin complexion and my round head, and I liked it because the girls liked it. I was liking it. I was like, okay, this is good. And so I was DJ Peach, and just used to spin all throughout, Milwaukee and at various parties and stuff like that.
Nice. What was what early on, if you could recall and share with us briefly, what was the hip hop scene like at that time? Because I'm assuming you're probably talking about late 70s, early 80s. What was the hip hop scene like in Wisconsin or in Milwaukee at that time?
It was amazing, and I tell you why. Because Milwaukee, since we're in the time machine and the DeLorean, and we go, back then,
there you go.
There was really no South music jumping off yet. Really, it was East Coast and West Coast,
right? And
so that was about it. And so you had Miami, which is the South, but I look at that more as a coastal city more than like the South. So, so you really had like us in the middle of all of that in the Midwest that loved everything. We loved DC Go-Go, so we was rocking Trouble Funk. We was rocking 2 Live Crew. We was also rocking everything from Profile Records, Run DMC and Def Jam and all of that, Sugar Hill. All of that type of stuff. But then we was also rocking stuff like Egyptian Lover and, even World Class Wrecking Crew, which was Dr. Dre's first situation. Right. So all of that stuff we was rocking from the West Coast. So we had a mixture, and then even rocking some house music, So when I spun, we would rock stuff that sounds a lot like the trap music stuff of today. It was on Profile, real slow beats, a lot of heavy 808. But then we would rock Tommy Boy stuff. We would rock Profile. We was rocking Def Jam. So it was just a lot of mixture of music. And I love that fact because, we was very innovative with it instead of just sticking to, because if you remember back in those days, East Coast didn't really mess with West Coast.
That's right.
And sort of vice versa. I mean, West Coast had to mess with East Coast to some extent because East Coast created it. But, it was a little bit more separate back then. The West Coast was really trying to build their empire, and the East Coast was already building theirs. So for us, it was really just appreciating all of it. If it was house music, we appreciated it. If it was go-go, so on and so forth.
Sure. So when did you start, I guess, making that trip, or when did that transition come for you from, Milwaukee down to Tennessee and at Atlanta, or Tennessee, and then, I guess what would eventually become Atlanta?
Well, I was actually every summer since I was probably 5 or something, I would go spend my summers in Tennessee. And so my mom and dad, would sort of use that as a time to get the kids away. It was me and my brother. And so my grandmother lived in very rural Tennessee. It's a little small town called Hennings, Tennessee.
Sure.
It's probably has about, I don't know, hundreds of people in the town, not even thousands,
Wow.
Open fields, outhouses. I don't know if y'all know what outhouses are, but
we know.
Well water, outhouses. I mean, sometimes no electricity in some of the houses. So I mean, like real poor rural South. And then, so I spent all my summers there. So that was sort of like partial home throughout the year. Okay. But then when I graduated from high school, literally the week after I graduated, I moved to Atlanta because Milwaukee was getting very violent. It was a lot of gang violence, a lot of gunplay, and I really felt like I wouldn't live if I stayed there. And so even some of my house parties that I would throw was getting shot up, and it was just a lot of stuff going on that I knew if I stayed here, I might not make it past 21. So I said, I better get out of here. So I went to Atlanta. Atlanta at the time was really booming because a lot of blacks was moving to Atlanta for opportunities. There's a lot of job opportunities. People really just making things happen in Atlanta. And so I went down there to go to school at the Art Institute of Atlanta. And that's sort of where, I thought of this whole Arrested Development thing and started trying to get people down with that movement.
Sure. Okay. So let's and that brings us, that's a perfect opportunity for us. I've always wanted to know, let me back up some, because you mentioned, spending, I guess, virtually every summer of your childhood years down in the South in Tennessee with your grandmother. Yeah. And I know that's the experience for a lot of kids whose parents or whose grandparents might have moved up, or specifically whose parents might have moved up to the north and settled there, but they still have roots in the South. A lot of children spent summers in the South. I know I did. I know Stats did, and he continues to now, even in his adult years. He's tripping back and forth to the South because his grandmother lives there. But how much of your consciousness in terms of obtaining this knowledge of who we are and the richness of our culture was created then during that time when you were going to Tennessee? Because I'm assuming that probably not on the same scale as our parents had to, and certainly not on the same scale that our grandparents experienced it. But I'm thinking that if you're talking about rural Tennessee, I'm sure that you've, even in the early 80s, experienced some level of racism and segregation in Tennessee in those small towns.
I experienced hardcore racism throughout my life in Milwaukee and in Tennessee.
Wow, Milwaukee. Wow.
In Milwaukee, literally, we was one of two black families that lived in an all-white neighborhood.
Okay.
And so, back in the 70s, my mom and dad were the first of their families to go off to college. And so they went to college. My dad was an entrepreneur. He came from the rural South, which was Tennessee. My mom came from East St. Louis, which was hardcore ghetto, straight up poverty. Yeah. So when they got their job situations, they wanted to move out to the suburbs, which I totally understood. They wanted something safer for their kids. And so I was raised up in that area in Milwaukee, but because we was the only black family, this is the early 70s, Martin Luther King was shot in 68, assassinated in 68. So this whole racism thing was still very real and very, obvious. And so many times people would come through, destroy our house, steal our furniture from out of the house, put it on top of the roof, destroy our playground.
Wow.
Me and my brother witnessed literally getting beat up, jumped by various, white people back in these days. And my dad, he was one of those kind of guys, he carried a gun all the time. So he would come and he was a very strong, proud man, and he would fight back in his own way. But even the city went after my dad because he was one of those types of men that, would defy being run over.
That's right.
And so the city itself went after him and tried to, and not just tried, they succeeded in stripping a lot of his businesses away. So that was the racism I witnessed in Milwaukee. But in the South, it was racism as well. It's just more of a Southern style of racism. But I tell you, being in Tennessee and being in the rural South, it helped me form a lot of my opinions about us as a people and about where our strengths are. Throughout the world, whether it be in Africa, whether it be in the Caribbean, Brazil, South America, here, we are a people that are innovative and self-reliant. And so in the South, we still had that opportunity to be self-reliant. My grandmother had acres and acres of land. She used to eat most of her food from the field. And a lot of her neighbors and my other relatives, did the same. And so we really depended on each other a whole lot. The community was more of a community. People would, trade fruits and vegetables with one another. We would kill our own hogs and chickens and beef. I mean, it was a very self-reliant reality. And so I would notice that when I would go back home, there was a very big difference between our ability to be self-reliant when we was in the cities, because we had to get our food from either welfare programs or we was getting them from the grocery store.
Right.
We didn't have anything to do with planting it. We didn't have anything to do with growing it. So our knowledge of how to sustain ourselves was a lot different in the cities than it was in the country. And so I always remembered that there was something special about us being able to do for self that I take with me to this very day. You know what I mean? So that's one of the things I got from the South. But I mean, my mom and dad were entrepreneurs. So their whole thing was, don't work for anybody if you can help it.
That's right.
And so work for yourself and create jobs for other black people. So that's what they would teach me. And so their whole thing was trying to develop businesses for black people. So my mom, to this day, she owns the largest black newspaper in Milwaukee. It's called the Milwaukee Community Journal.
Wow.
And, it's 40 years going on, And then my dad, like I told you, he owned this nightclub. Well, this nightclub, he owned the first fast food drive-through in the black neighborhood in all of America. So, like, back in the day, McDonald's was obviously in existence, but he had this restaurant called Robbie's. And his whole thing was, why don't we do drive-throughs so people can get their food, quicker? Right. And no restaurants had done that in the black community. They thought that the blacks weren't, it wasn't safe enough in the black community to do that. And so he started that, and of course they would start to do it after that. So there's a lot of cool things that I was privy to, through my parents and through my upbringing.
Nice.
Wow. Now, Speaks, is it true that did you used to write for the Milwaukee Journal or no?
Yeah, Milwaukee Community Journal, I did. In fact, me and my guy Gary Hoover, we went to school together, and we would start. First we would always build. I mean, we used to have what we called fireside chats, where we would build about black history, and we were studying Anthony Browder, and the Browder Files, and all of these really, really cool books and things of that nature. Malcolm X, of course, Marcus Garvey, stuff like that. But we would have these chats, and in these chats, we would talk about how to become more free as a people and how to get to the next level and overcome oppression. And so we would write these stories, which would end up being, some of those stories would end up being songs on the first album. So we would write stories like, I did a story called Fishing for Religion, which would end up being one of the tracks on 3 Years, 5 Months, 2 Days. So, I mean, a lot of the writing that we would do, and I'm so grateful to my mom for giving me that opportunity to write, because that would end up making me, or helping me, to flesh out my thoughts and flesh out what I really believed and what I felt the needs were for us as a people.
Sure, absolutely. Nice. So let's moving forward to Arrested Development. Can we I guess, and to me, it seems pretty obvious. You're going through this period of self-exploration and the realization of who we are. So you're coming into that knowledge of self, so to speak, right? The Arrested Development, the name Arrested Development, where did that come from? And if you can you give us the context behind it?
Well, the context was really looking out at our people and seeing the huge struggles that we've been through, whether it be lynching, riots, race riots, massacres, burning down whole towns, Black Wall Street, just these things that have happened to us in this country that's unique, that has not happened to any other people, in this country, and really throughout the world to some extent. I saw that we was in a state of arrested development, and most of it was not of a fault of our own. It was because of the cards that was dealt to us. But when I saw that name as an Arrested Development, I was like, this is what we're fighting against. And so we put it up like on the chalkboard in a sense to say, okay, this is going to be the name of the band so that we can remind everybody what we're fighting against, and that we never forget that we have to move beyond this state of arrested development. You know, like it's almost like diagnosing the illness so that you can fight it. Sure,
absolutely. One of the things that I always appreciated about the group, it embodied, I guess, the experience in its entirety, but the richness of the culture, right? It wasn't anything negative about what the group reflected in terms of the presence of each person, because what I particularly found interesting was that there were several different people that were a part of Arrested Development, right? But everybody played their role in the machine that is the group. So that made it, work perfectly in the eyes of the fan. Right?
I totally agree with you.
So and that was something that we had absolutely appreciated, because I think that it was a perfect contrast to me as well, because if we think about, I'm visualizing this now, and I think this is a perfect explanation. If you juxtapose Arrested Development against, let's say, a Public Enemy, right? The message is the same. The intent of the group is the same, but the delivery is slightly different. However, the message is still one of positivity, strength, and the reinforcement of who we are and the richness of where we come from as a culture, right? And if you think about like Public Enemy, right, it was purely militant, right? And S1Ws, you had Terminator X, you had Flavor Flav, you had Chuck D, right, Professor Griff, right, and everybody played their role, and it made the experience that much richer for the fan. It was the exact same thing for Arrested Development, except we were able to tap back into the original traditions of our culture back to the motherland, right? But at the same time, through that thing called hip hop and rap, we were able to experience the message in a contemporary way. You know what I mean? And it just worked. Worked absolutely perfectly, man. So I know, no doubt, man. I remember hearing an interview with you guys some time. I mean, it's been a long time ago now, and I just want to. It's been so long. I don't want to say that this is absolutely the fact. So I'm just going to ask it. Or pose it to you as a question. So 3 years, 5 months, and 2 days. Is it true that represents the time that it took you guys to get put on?
Yeah, it was. And see, back in these days, it was tough to get a record deal. You know what I mean? And there wasn't internet. It wasn't like you could put your own record out and distribute it throughout the world like you can on the internet now. So to get a record deal was a very big deal, and especially being a group from Atlanta and being a individual from Milwaukee, who I had no peers that ever had records out in Milwaukee, and even in Atlanta at that time. This is pre-Outkast. This is pre, CeeLo and the Goody Mob, and all of that stuff. Is pre-TLC even. It was pre, only person that had put a record out at that time was Jermaine Dupri. He had a group called Silk Times Leather that he put out with Joyce Irby. So it was really Joyce Irby, who was part of Time, I think. What was her group? I forget. But Climax was her group. And she sort of put under her arms Dallas Austin, and Jermaine Dupri had a record deal with, I think, Geffen Records, and he had a group called Silk Times Leather. But other than that, there was no real nationwide records coming from out of there. So we was very grateful when we finally got that deal. We was counting the days, and that ended up being the title of the album. So, yeah, it was a very big deal.
Yeah, absolutely, man, absolutely. So, and I'd like that to be a testament to those listeners out there, particularly the younger listeners that think that they think that a career worth anything, particularly one that's going to be a long-term sustaining career, it happens overnight. It doesn't. It absolutely doesn't. It takes years. Sometimes in some cases it could take even longer than the 3 years that you speak about, right? For you guys.
Well, it did for me too. I mean, you know, I had other groups prior to Arrested Development that never got that nationwide record deal either. So, you know, even before Arrested Development, I had a group called Attack. You know what I'm saying? So it's like. This stuff was, you know, in the makings for a lot of years, you know. Absolutely.
So that first album comes out, and it's it does phenomenally well. There's several joints off of there that that obviously do extremely well. I know we've obviously talked about Tennessee a little bit, but Stats, you brought up one which I thought was great, and that was the Mr. Wendell joint, right?
Yeah, that was my joint.
And Mr. Wendell was such a different sound, but it was just crazy, just the message behind it. So I'd really like to talk about some of, like, particularly this song. What was the inspiration behind it?
Well, Mr. Wendell was a true story, pretty much. I mean, back when Arrested Development was, bubbling and trying to get our music out there, we would spend a lot of time in various little sort of homemade studios in downtown Atlanta. Well, some homeless people that was just in that area would always stop through and visit us, and we would always talk, and we would build with them. We build about knowledge or just about life or just help them out in any way we can. So some of the things that I talk about in the song was just real life things that would happen when we would hang with them. But that song was very much inspired by, De La Soul's 3 Feet High and Rising. They had a song called I Know, where they sampled Steely Dan. And that album, period, the 3 Feet High and Rising record, really was a huge inspiration for us. There was a few inspirations for us. Public Enemy, because of their knowledge and Chuck D's command of the microphone and his voice and just his whole presentation. And also their conceptualism, like you just mentioned, with Terminator X, Minister of Information, Professor Griff, S1Ws, all of that.
Right.
Flavor Flav. I mean, it's very conceptual. But then you also had, De La, who's very musically challenging. Like, they were doing stuff that wasn't being done at the time. And much props to Prince Paul, who had a lot to do with that. And he was starting to mess with that with Stetsasonic. And he would do different little interludes and stuff. And it was very different music at the time for hip hop. So I knew that, he had a great deal to do with the De La, just the width of what De La would do. But also, Soul to Soul had a lot to do with our influence. And so coming from the UK, which we just did a show with them in the Middle East a couple days ago.
Okay.
They had the visuals of, here's Jazzy B. He's like the sort of the Dr. Dre of the situation. He's got a lot of different vocalists and various people that's going to guest star on his joints. But they had these African women dancing and the dreads. And
right.
See, what I always felt about Arrested Development was that our goal is to get in where we fit in. It wasn't to replace a Public Enemy. It was to add more dimension to a Public Enemy. You know what I'm saying? So that here they are with the militants. And to me, the whole thing about black consciousness and understanding knowledge of self is that first you likely are going to start off being angry because there's so much that you realize has been taken from us and stripped from us and kept from us so that we don't understand ourselves. So it's anger. And to me, Public Enemy taps into that perfectly, which is it's necessary, it's needed. And then after you're angry for a certain amount of time, then you start going from anger to just love of the people and love of the culture and trying to spread that love to others. So that's to me where Arrested Development stepped in. It had more of a spiritual edge to it. It had more of a, this whole thing of, yes, we're angry, and at the same time we're moving towards this next dimension, which is just how do we love one another and get out of this state of Arrested Development. So we felt like we complemented PE and X-Clan and, a lot of the other groups that was kicking knowledge back in these days. Poor Righteous Teachers. And I think what the system would want to do, the white power system, but also record labels who didn't understand this whole knowledge movement, they would try to pit us against each other, you know.
Right.
They would try to pit Arrested Development, saying, okay, well, they're soft, whereas PE was hard. It's not even about none of that. What it was about is we all, just like you guys noticed, that we all had the same message. It was just a matter of trying to have that varying perspective of how that message could reach as many people as possible. Yeah. Because there's some people that their first record will be Arrested Development, and there's other people that would choose a PE, which is fine either which way. I feel like, you know, we got to reach to people in many different ways, and that was